This is Pat Barrett, and I'm going to hit a theme that'll pursue us throughout these YouTube videos that I'm going to be making, and that is the 60s. Last night I was chatting with a woman from Birmingham, Alabama. I'm going to have to review my notes a little here as I do this. And that's about 200 miles from Dothan, Alabama, where I lived in 1956. I was in high school as a sophomore. And it's important to know that this woman was 55 years old, and she is black. I talked with her about my time in Dothan, Alabama, and I told her how I walked around town as a teenager and saw only one black person, a teenager, waiting for the bus in a town that was about 15% black. Didn't see any black people, but how did I know there were a lot of black people living there? Well, when I rode the city bus to school, those buses were packed stem to stern with black women. So there had to be a lot of black people living in the town. They were all wearing white uniforms because they worked in white people's homes, okay, as maids. I think that we have to remember that these cities in the 50s were very segregated in the South. They were also very segregated in the North. I lived in Phoenix, Arizona, very segregated. I lived in Toledo, Ohio, very segregated, okay? I'll tell you later, in a later video, my experiences there in Dothan. But when I start to show the dramatic changes in societies, in our society, wrought by the 60s and other societies as well, I was, you have to realize I was born in 1941. This woman was born in 1970. So what was in between? The 60s. She was surprised as a black person in Alabama, not far from Dothan, of the conditions that I saw 20 years, about a little less than 20 years before she was born. And at another time, I will chart the buildup to the 60s that occurred during the 50s. A lot of people think of the 50s as halcyon days, as they say. Everything was fine. Well, no, they weren't. And I'll tell you about that too. But right now, I want to look at the conditions that changed from the 50s to the 70s, that in-between period we know as the 60s. Imagine yourself driving through 100 or more miles down a highway, no wider than a side street in town, only 2 lanes. Cars passing each other less than a foot apart at 60 miles an hour. Then do it at night. That's how we drove across country with no freeways. In the 60s, we got freeways. Say you want to call someone on the phone. You jiggle the cradle because there's no dial tone. There's no dial. An operator downtown just comes on and asks you who you want to talk to. She might tell you they're out of town for a week. That's great news if you want to break into their house, right? By the way, notice I said she for the operator. Jobs overall were divided along lines of sex, male, female. Sometimes, actually often, by race. Cooks were males. Waitresses, not wait staff, were females, and the bosses were male. I recall the first white skycap at the airport because before that, skycaps were all black. At the hotel restaurant I worked in, all the black and Hispanic and Asian employees worked only in the back. The customers could not see them. My first flight across country was in a prop plane, and I wore a suit. I was 10 years old. You wore a suit when you flew on an airplane. Stewardesses, not flight attendants, were selected for their looks and their weight. They had to be slim and pretty. Coffee, tea, or me was a common phrase. But we'll talk about some of the rules people had in those days. Speaking of jets, which I didn't fly on, I saw my first ones right after World War II, maybe when I was 7 or so. They were in a flight and were red. No propellers, really weird. And same thing with first helicopter. You could send a letter to someone anywhere, but it took days to get there. Telegrams were quicker, but cost a lot per word. So sentences were odd, like the one asking Joe's age. How old, Joe? The answer came back, old Joe, fine. I'm sorry, that's an old joke. Zip codes speeded things up, but didn't come in until the early 60s. My extremely conservative employer, I worked in a bookstore then, and we mailed out a lot of packages and things. And he was, oh my God, one number wrong, and your package will go to Alaska. Coffee, my favorite subject, coffee was percolated. Bubble, 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 bubble. And so was boiled to death and tasted like crap. But we drank it anyway. By the 60s, the drip system took over, and special coffees from exotic places became common. On a darker note, we lived under two big threats: the atom bomb and polio. So frightened of atomic explosions were we that I remember to this day dreaming, a real nightmare, of a flash of a giant explosion at night in the sky, and desperately trying to shove my body into a curb on the street, trying to avoid the blast and the fire. Polio terrified parents. We saw pictures of people in iron lungs, big tanks, in which a polio victim lay with only their heads sticking out, like something on a science fiction movie. Some were in it for a few weeks, others for a lifetime. A true nightmare. I got the Salk vaccine against polio in 8th grade in 1955. This last change into the 60s was not noticed much, by me. I just took the little vaccine by mouth, but it sure was by my parents. And today, we are faced with a madman who wants to take all that away, vaccines and so forth. I had chickenpox, measles, and mumps. I remember them. All of which most of you watching this have never had. You most certainly have not had smallpox, which is lethal. In another video, we will talk about abortion rights, 1973, the pill, the 60s, too late for my wife and me, and other fun stuff about how the 60s, as conservatives tell it, destroyed America. Until then, thank you for watching.